Thank you for joining us. My name is Pat McConnell with Americans for Prosperity, and we're honored to be here today alongside so many leaders of business, industry, and government from all over the world to learn more about how trade builds Colorado. Because by working together, we can better educate Colorado lawmakers about trade's impact on job creation, supply chains, emerging industries, and business growth. We're going to take just a minute and play one of our stories now. This one's from Ashley Warsh with the Colorado Department of Agriculture.
Agriculture is a major industry here in Colorado that provides safe and delicious products to consumers not only here in Colorado, but around the world. Trade is important for Colorado agriculture because we are able to produce a high quality product that consumers not only want, but also need. Trade not only helps companies grow because the majority of the population live outside of the U.S., but because it allows us the opportunity to import and receive quality inputs. We are lucky to be here in Colorado and have so many great companies, producers, and products around the state. Trade is vital for Colorado agriculture.
So without further ado, it's my honor to introduce Karen Gerwitz, President of the World Trade Center Denver, to lead our distinguished panel of experts to discuss the changes and impacts recently brought about by the USMCA.
And I am so excited to facilitate this discussion on the most important free trade agreement to the United States and to try to help shed some light on this updates from NAFTA to USMCA. But first, let's talk about the most obvious change, and that is the name. What's in a name? USMCA, CUSMA, ASEUM, TMEC. Each of us now are referring to what used to be called NAFTA in a different way now. Let's talk a little bit about the impact of trade with North America. $3.6 billion with a B dollars per day is traded across North America. That's an incredible amount. And 47% of all of the United States fuel that comes into the US comes from Canada. Colorado sold $4.6 billion of goods and services to Canada and Mexico last year, 97% of which Colorado's beverages, all of our beverages, beer especially, are sold to Canada and Mexico. And 1 in 3 acres of farmland are planted for export. In other words, trade matters. Since we make things together, we absolutely rely on each other and have each other's backs, especially when it comes to security. NORAD in Colorado Springs is a great example. It's a binational Canadian-US military command, but for more than 50 years, the US and Canada military members have been working side by side to secure and protect our two vast countries. Let me first introduce our cherished diplomats. I'll start with Consul General of Mexico, Berenice Rendon Talavera, who's been serving Denver since 2017, and Consul General of Canada, Stéphane Lessard, based in Denver since 2016, also served as the Dean of the Consular Corps here in Colorado. From Mexico's perspective, what was the #1 win for Mexico in upgrading from NAFTA to USMCA?
For Mexico, all along was to maintain the strategic partnership with the United States and Canada. And under that came what we have been talking about for the last 2 years here in Colorado and everywhere else, is about certainty, about continuity and stability for trade and investments. And I think that was achieved on the part of Mexico because, as you remember, we have ups and downs, and sometimes it seemed like a roller coaster a year ago, 2 years ago, during the negotiations. But finally, it came to an end, the negotiation, and we kept those issues. The other thing for Mexico is more opportunities to strengthen competitiveness in the region because maybe we will have more trade and investments since we have new sectors, telecommunications, e-commerce, new regulations on labor, environment, anti-corruption issues. And I think of late, the COVID times that we are living in has proved how important it will be, and it is, to have supply chains, production supply chains in the region, so we don't depend so much on pharmaceuticals, medical equipment, or whatever comes after all this situation regarding how we produce, how we sell, how we import, export, etc. E-commerce, for instance, will be after COVID, or it is with COVID, a very important issue in our economies.
Tell us from the Canadian perspective, what were the #1 wins for this upgrade?
From a Canadian perspective, the important thing was to preserve the gains we had achieved under NAFTA, where we had, over the last 25 years or so, not only grown trade dramatically between the three countries, but we had also changed the way we make things. So we started making things together, whether it be cars, airplanes, defense equipment, agricultural products, so on. And all of that integration between us was the stepping stone to our future competitiveness. So important, first of all, was do no harm, and we've certainly done that. We have an agreement that is preserves free trade, that is tariff-free trade between the three countries for 99.9% of goods that we make. And again, we make them together with our integrated supply chains, always further integrated every day. And I think that's the seed for continued prosperity. And perhaps looking at it from, I don't know if it's geopolitical or not, but geo-business perspective, I think this is a time, because of the pandemic, but also other factors, including increased protectionism in different parts of the world. This is a time we hear from business leaders where some of them are rethinking their supply chains and their suppliers being perhaps in remote places in the world, and the risks associated and the costs associated with having suppliers in different places that are perhaps subject to trade measures and so on. So, and the pandemic, I think, has highlighted again the risks of that we expose ourselves to, our vulnerabilities, if we rely on suppliers in other countries, not to mention China or others, for essential goods. And I think the combination of these factors is one where the USMCA can not only maintain what we've achieved, but take us further as a springboard to further strengthen our supply chains within North America, make ourselves, as Berenice said, ever more competitive, because other trading blocs are doing the same, and we need to continue out-competing them on the world markets. Thank you for convening us today. This is indeed my last event as Consul General of Canada in the region. And I wanted to thank everybody online and all our partners who have made the last 4 years for me the highlight of my career and a true privilege to serve in this beautiful region. Thank you very much of the USMCA.
Everett Eisenstadt. Everett is a former U.S. government official who currently serves as Senior Vice President of Global Public Policy for General Motors. He is the former Deputy Director of the National Economic Council, and among other roles, he served as Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for the Western Hemisphere, focusing on trade agreements with Chile, Colombia, Panama, and Peru. Everett, welcome. As a longstanding trade professional who used to negotiate these multifaceted agreements as Assistant USTR, how do these advancements of USMCA compared to maybe what we would have gotten under the U.S. Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Well, first, thank you for allowing me to be part of this important event, and congratulations for the great work that you're doing on behalf of Colorado and the nation, really in highlighting the importance of trade to the U.S. economy and to the state's economy. We at General Motors have facilities across the country. We full-heartedly endorse your belief that trade is fundamental growth, and really appreciate your stepping up to do this important panel. So I would say that first, let me just say we're very, very pleased about the agreement. As you know, it went into force just last month, July 1st, started with the implementation. We at General Motors are fully committed to seeing its success. And as was said by the Consul General, the integrated supply chains is absolutely one of the key elements of the USMCA. We had done some, when we looked at this, we were concerned that the agreement wouldn't go forward. We analyzed our own supply chains, and we know that car parts cross a border many, many times. In fact, we know, it could be 8, 10, 12 times before a car part comes across and becomes a fully assembled vehicle. So it's the supply chains, the connectivity, and the integration is absolutely fundamental. And so I think one of the key differences between the USMCA and the TPP is the degree of integration in the region. There's no question that had TPP gone forward, it would have been more of it would have been a different type of supply chains. The supply chains would have been much more diverse, from China to Malaysia. And I think we would have seen perhaps a diffusion of the regional supply chains. And I think what the USMCA has done is really solidified the integration in the region, and if anything, had enhanced the importance of the supply chain. I'll just give you some examples. Because of the USMCA, we just invested about $300 million in a Lake Orion, Michigan plant that would help us ensure compliance. We've also put our joint facility with LG Chem, a battery manufacturing facility in Lordstown, Ohio, which is a $2.3 billion investment, where we're going to make battery cells for our new vehicles. And a big part of that was because the integrated supply chains of the USMCA. So we're very committed to it. It's highly important. I think it has a very good effect on the region and will be very good for our growth. I just want to say one quick point about the pandemic and the COVID response. As some of the panelists have already said, the geostrategic element of this can't be overlooked. I think you said that, in fact. It's really true. And the relationships we have with our counterparts, both in the private sector and the government, are absolutely essential. We value them so highly. And the pandemic, during the pandemic, we worked with governments both in Mexico and Canada to ensure supplies of masks. We started a facility in Toluca, Mexico, to make masks. We started a facility up in Canada to make masks for our workers there. We're making masks and PPE here. And it's those relationships that really mattered and let us have a regional response to a really, really devastating pandemic. So I just want to thank both Consul Generals and their governments for their willingness to work with General Motors in fighting the pandemic and helping us, get to where we are, and we'll look forward to continuing to work with them to ensure its success going forward.
I'm very excited to be on this panel. As you know, Toyota has 10 manufacturing facilities in the US. Actually, the 10th one is being built. It's a joint venture with Mazda in Alabama. We built 30 million vehicles in the United States since 1986, and USMCA is definitely very important to us. We have 180,000 employment, including the dealers. So this is very impactful to the US economy. But USMCA definitely has some very unique requirements to make sure that auto sector is producing more components in the United States. So
thank you again.
If I may just mention some of these uniqueness. Well, first of all, NAFTA already had the highest
Motor North America for over 20 years now. And she's also serving as the director of trade policy for the
that
company.
means unless
Yuri also served as past president for Women in International Trade, a great organization
within North America, even if the final assembly is done in the US, we can export duty-free to Canada and Mexico. We have to make sure that enough contents are produced in North America. And Toyota has this principle: produce where we sell and procure where we produce. So we have always worked very hard to make sure our contents stay very high. But that threshold was just increased to 75% under USMCA. So it's much higher now. In addition to that, they have this labor value requirement. That means you have to produce certain amount of vehicle at the plant where they sell, where they pay at least $16 per hour. So for passenger cars, 40% of vehicle has to be produced at the plants where they pay at least $16 per hour. And for trucks, it's 45%. So not only that you have to produce more in North America, they wanted to make sure that people who are producing in auto industry are getting paid at least $16 per hour. So other things that was very strategic by the negotiators to negotiate was that key components. They wanted to make sure key components of the vehicles are produced within North America. So these strategic parts are produced in North America was very important to them. And those components are, of course, engines, transmissions, axle, traditional auto parts, right? Body and chassis, steering system, suspension system. All those things have to be produced in North America. So even if your rest of vehicle is produced in North America, if any of these things are not produced in North America, you don't qualify. And also advanced battery for non-combustion engine vehicles as well. Lastly, they wanted to make sure steels and aluminums were made in North America. So 70% of vehicles of the steel and aluminums that we use in the vehicles have to come from North America. So all these things are like set in place to make sure that to increase more components to be produced in North America.
The dairy industry had some significant changes within, significant challenges within NAFTA. And some of the most significant changes and wins, you might say, with the USMCA were said to be with the dairy industry, especially in Canada. I would love for you to describe kind of what changes took place and what the significant impact might be on Leprino.
Certainly, and thanks for inviting me. Trade is so critical to agriculture. Agriculture in general is a net exporter. The dairy industry is highly reliant on expanding our exports and export demand.
Let me now turn to Sue Taylor.
Drop back into
Sue
the
is the
broader
VP
context
of
of
Dairy
the NAFTA renegotiation and say
Leprino Foods,
that
the
Mexico
largest
is far and
mozzarella
above our
cheese
most important
producer in the
export
world
customer.
that hails here right in
And
Denver.
we were very
They also
concerned
produce
as
whey
the
protein powder
negotiations
and other
were
dairy-based
started
products.
the metals tariffs and other tactics by the administration were risking that market in our relationship with Mexico. And so in large part, to start with, our first and foremost objective was to do no harm to that market. And that was achieved. We had some bumps along the way, and there are a number of things that I would have liked not to have happened along the way that were disruptive. But ultimately, the market with Mexico was retained as a duty-free market, which was first established under the initial NAFTA, with some minor tweaks in terms of administrative processes that are helpful. Canada, with all due respect to the Consul General, has always been our problem child. Under the WTO, the tariffs on cheese going into Canada are 245%. They maintain a highly protected supply management program in Canada and highly protective of that sector, very strong dairy lobby in Canada. And although there was a significant victory dance done across some of the dairy players in terms of progress made in the renegotiation, I would consider that pretty nominal in terms of the improved access. We did get slightly more access on cheese and some other dairy products. On cheese, it looks to me like it's about 0.4% of the Canadian market. Initially goes up to a little over 2%, pretty nominal numbers. And then our next question is how that new access is managed. And in the initial approach that Canada has in terms of administering that new access, we have a number of concerns. The tariff or the import licenses are largely going to manufacturers in Canada who would be our competitors. And so designed to minimize the fill would be our first assessment. And also about half to industrial uses. So pushing the value of imports downward. The other piece that had a victory dance around it is Canada, because they've maintained the supply management program within their industry and moved prices up to very high levels, they're not competitive in the world market, but on some components, they are surplus. And so they have designed into a very complex milk pricing system there, a mechanism to what we would consider subsidized exports of some milk powders. Their reforms on that piece of their distortion are to be implemented over the next 6 months. And so we're watching vigilantly as they make those adjustments in their regulations. to see if actually they come through or whether they rename those programs and hide them in a different way. So yes, we made progress, but maybe not to the extent that the victory dances would imply.
Comments. So let me move, if I could, to Lynn Granger. Lynn serves as the Executive Director of the American Petroleum Institute and former COO of Colorado Concern. Lynn, are you with us?
I am.
Great. Maybe you could answer this question. What does the USMCA mean for regional energy security, and for that matter, the participating nations' respective national security? Welcome.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks so much for having me and for organizing this. It's definitely something to celebrate for sure. First I'd say, the North American energy markets are deeply integrated and interconnected, and the free flow of energy products and investments in natural gas and oil across our borders is absolutely critical. Personally, not only am I a proud representative of the natural gas and oil industry, but I'm also an Army vet, and I've had the honor of participating in several multinational exercises with both Canada and Mexico, greatly improving our interoperability, and readiness. And this trade agreement, in my opinion, is another great step in our truly successful partnership for sure. For the first time in 75 years, the U.S. has achieved energy independence, which is a crucial component.
Let me now
to our
introduce
national
Rich
security.
Harper. He's the manager of
and North
International
America
Trade
is
for
not
the
far behind.
Outdoor Industry
The production of
Association.
petroleum and other liquids by the U.S., Canada, and Mexico will soon outpace our collective consumption, which will be amazing. Not to mention that this also allows North America to be less reliant on other suppliers and less subject to potential supply disruptions because of free and safe energy trade with our friends and allies in Canada and Mexico. Bottom line, Karen, the passage of USMCA will allow the natural gas and oil industry to continue providing affordable, reliable, and cleaner energy that powers North America's economic prosperity while simultaneously increasing our national and regional security. And that's fantastic. And I would love, if we have some time, to hear Stefan or Bernice's thoughts.
In Washington, D.C. Rich, are you with us? Welcome.
Yes, thank you. And greetings to my fellow panelists. Thank you, Karen, for the invitation. A particular hello to Everett, my old friend and colleague from my Capitol Hill days. So great to be on a panel with you again, Everett. You're exactly right, Karen. I mean, outdoor recreation is huge in Colorado. It supports 229,000 jobs, $28 billion in consumer spending, and 71% of Coloradans get outdoors for outdoor recreation. So it's a huge economic driver in the state. And for our members, most of our members are small and medium-sized businesses. So there's significant benefits here in the agreement. I'm starting off with a dedicated chapter to SMEs, a panel of government representatives from each of the parties dedicated to promoting trade investment among SMEs. It also cuts through some red tape, requiring the publication of taxes and tariffs and regulations, online searchable database of customs procedures. So these will help our small, medium-sized businesses cut through, some of the red tape. But just as important in building off the comments from the Consul General of Canada, it preserves what was already in place, the 25 years of reciprocal duty-free market access for outdoor apparel,
So Whitney
footwear, and
Rink,
equipment.
please join
So
us
the outdoor
now.
company
She
that
is
has
the
a
trade compliance
manufacturing
professional
facility
from
for footwear
IBM.
in Mexico,
She's certainly
those
worked
products
with
remain
many other
duty-free, and it's
Colorado
not
global firms
insignificant.
like Miller
A pair
Coors,
of hiking
Alcom,
boots
and
can have a tariff up to
Whitney,
37.5%.
are you with
and
us?
for domestic manufacturers here in the U.S.,
I'd love
also
to talk to you
preserving
about
the duty-free
how
market access to
USMCA
Canada
was
and Mexico for made in
upgraded
USA
or modernized
gear. And of course, a
for
lot
our
of the
global
inputs from
economy
Made in
related to
USA
technology and digital
companies
trade.
do also come from
Yeah,
Canada and
thanks for
Mexico.
having
So
me. So really,
preserving
the
what was already
USMCA is
there
essential
was
for
a huge
businesses to
win
compete
for
in
the
today's tech
industry,
environments.
and preserving the benefits
NAFTA
of
was
the agreement
signed
for the
over
past
25
25
years
years.
ago.
And
In
I would also be remiss if
1994,
not
less
also
than a
not
quarter
pointing out
percent
that
of the global
in terms of
population
looking at the upgrades
used
for
the internet
SMEs, for our
compared
small
to
medium-sized
more than
businesses, it's also
58%
true that
today, and
the core
maybe
values
even
of the
more
industry and for
through
those businesses
the
are
times of
protecting
COVID.
labor rights, protecting the environment,
So
and seeing
NAFTA
the
mentions
labor
things
and
like the
environmental provisions
telegraph,
move to the core
but not
text of
the
the
internet. So this alone makes it obvious that NAFTA is outdated for today's e-commerce environment. It's believed that half of all value created in the global economy over the next decade will be created digitally. So we are moving even more towards a digital age now than before. The agreement also recognizes that data and innovation are the foundational components of the world's economy, and it is establishing a first of its kind digital trade chapter. I believe that the new digital trade chapter does contain the strongest disciplines on digital trade of any previous international agreement. It allows us to expand in our innovative products and services so that the United States can continue to have a competitive advantage. The USMCA protects companies from being required to share source code, encryption keys, algorithms as a condition for market access. So it's really protecting the proprietary tools and formulas that US tech companies need in order to stay competitive. Countries are also continuing to explore ways to use tariffs to discriminate against US digital trade products. So the USMCA makes restrictions against digital tariffs permanent so that we can continue to have a duty-free internet, and it also sends a clear message to our trading partners. So I really believe that USMCA is setting the gold standard for modern trade in order to help us compete better in the 21st century economy. And really, it's not only tech companies that benefit from the USMCA's digital trade provisions. US companies across all industries are relying on data, technology, and digital services to optimize our operations, enabling employees to collaborate better and boost our abilities to meet customer needs better.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I'll jump in because there is something really important that we still need to tackle. And I think that the USMCA went a long way in addressing the current supply chain challenges. And as many of the panelists said, you know, creating stability and predictability in the regions are very
we have
welcome.
strong views about
but we have a lot
tariffs
more
in
work
Canada.
to do in the region. We have infrastructure needs.
I don't think
we have
we're the only ones.
transportation, integration.
We're very careful with this
and I
because
think
we know
need
that
to keep our
tariffs,
eye on
if a country
the future,
imposes a
which is,
tariff on
rapidly
another
moving towards
country's
electric vehicles and
exports
self-driving
into
vehicles. And this really
our
is
country,
going to be one of the,
then it becomes
cutting
a tax.
edge,
It becomes an import tax.
really
and an
just
import tax
transformative parts
is not
of the
paid
US
by
economy.
the exporter
And so
into
I
my
hope
country.
that
It's paid by the
and
importers
can work together
who are
to try
often
to
businesses
one, get
who
safety
then have to
standards
pass
that
that
are
tax
fair
on
to eliminate non-tariff
to
barriers, but
their,
two, to think about how do we
purchasers or
continue
eventually
to drive
to the consumer.
the development
so
of electric
whether we call
vehicle
it a tariff, a
infrastructure
duty,
in North
whatever,
America. How do we
these are
create an
taxes
environment
that are
for
paid by the
investment in electric
importing
vehicles and
country's
self-driving
businesses,
vehicles?
raising costs
It's really
and
important for
further
the
undermining
future
the benefits of
USMCA,
having
and I
a
think
free
it's
trade
important
agreement
for
to begin with.
the environment.
So, for example, there's talk about reimposing aluminum tariffs of 10% on Canadian exports into the US of aluminum. This would raise the price to US businesses at a time when we need to be thinking about economic recovery, and raising costs on US businesses, for example, is not the best time.
Karen, from my perspective, some of the non-tariff barrier issues are actually increasing, whether it's departure from science-based food safety regs or whether it's labeling issues and enforcement that continue to move around. That's an area that needs to continue to be focused on in future trade agreements around the world.
It's a rapid fire Q&A right now.
Karen, if I could just jump in quickly, I think for outdoor companies, you want to make sure that USMCA is a springboard for additional bilateral and multilateral deals.
And thank you to our esteemed panel for sharing your knowledge, your insight, your expertise.
On average, about 14%.
As Karen mentioned, $3.6 billion a day is traded across this block, and that really demonstrates the depth and the value of these relationships.
So we hope that this is the springboard for additional deals that can get at some of these tariffs, which are ultimately taxes.
Jeff Papio with GEOTECH Environmental Equipment here in Denver, Colorado. We're a manufacturer of products and we export around the world. In order to do so, we import products
on this panel.
We do so
I definitely want to give one last shout out to Consul General Lassard, who has served us well here in Colorado. We wish all of you safe well-being for your families, and
as they come into our country, they then tax our products as we export to their country. So free and fair and open trade makes for a dynamic global economy where parts are made where it's most efficient to be made around the world.
The value of these relationships.
And that's the way it should be.
So now we'd like to take this opportunity to share another story. And this story is from Jeff Papio with GEOTECH Environmental Equipment, who imports and exports environmental products.
So our challenge to you is this. We ask that you contact our congressional delegation here at Colorado and humbly urge them to remove Section 232 tariffs to help revitalize our economy, because these tariffs harm American workers and businesses. These tariffs and the resulting retaliatory tariffs from other countries will continue to impose major costs on our competitiveness, growth, and economic security. On behalf of Americans for Prosperity and the World Trade Center Denver, I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists once again and for sharing your knowledge and insight. I'd also like to thank our partners at the Colorado Business Roundtable, the Colorado Farm Bureau, and of course, Manufacturers Edge for your support. We look forward to working together to support free trade and the prosperity that it brings.
So now, more than ever, we need to reduce these trade barriers so that we can help our businesses and our farmers